Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had another little break. Again, as I said, I can't offer you champagne or triangle sandwiches being a virtual conference, but at least you have the luxury of your home. I went and found my cat. I wanted to show her off to you all, but she went and hid. She doesn't like the noise of the speakers on my laptop. So welcome to our next session. The next session is a discussion panel, this time focusing on policy, clinical practice, and service provision. This session will be led by Chris Templin, and he is the Senior Policy Analyst at Amaze. I'm a huge fan of Amaze. I definitely recommend checking out their website if you haven't. They have awesome content, an Autism Connect, a helpline for autistic people. They have a section called Do One Thing for Autism and Change Your Reaction, which is all about encouraging people to learn about autism, change their reactions, get rid of the stigma. There's tips for workplaces to be more autism inclusive. It's awesome. Love what Amaze does. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. I'll hand over to you in one. We have some other panel members who will be joining as well. They will introduce themselves. And I just wanted to let everyone know, a reminder, closed captioning is available. You can turn this on at the bottom of your Zoom window and select the CC closed caption button and then click show subtitles. If you have any issues with that, you can message in the platform. And a reminder to keep those poster votes coming through. We have a few trickling in. So over to you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Corrine, and thanks for having us. So before we go into an introduction to the session, I'll give a bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about. I'll throw to each of my panel colleagues and ask that they give a brief introduction to themselves, their professional work, and if their organisation works in the intersections of autism and mental health, a little bit about what they do in their daily work. So I think I'll start by throwing to Mel. Mel, lead off.
Hi, Chris, thanks. Hey, everyone, my name's Mel Spencer, and I'm coming here today wearing multiple hats. First and foremost, I'm autistic. I am also a parent of 3 autistic individuals who all have complex mental health needs. But more importantly, I also run an organisation called Different Journeys, and we provide peer support for autistic teens and adults and their families by way of peer mentoring and social connection. And I think the most important thing that we're really passionate about is the comorbidity of mental health and autism, and accessing correct and appropriate supports and services to meet our needs.
All right, thanks, Mel. I'll go around on the order that I have on my screen here. Eileesh, you're next. Lead off.
Hello, everyone. My name's Eileesh Diviney. I'm the Manager of Suicide Prevention Programs in the Department of Health here in Victoria. Our program is, as the name describes, is responsible for the suicide prevention in activities in Victoria, in particular in my team, leading on the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system. The final report was launched this year in March. So my role is, in particular for today, I'll be talking about our hospital outreach post-suicidal engagement, or HOPE program, which is a program designed for people following an attempt at suicide or when they are at risk of suicide, and also working with their families, carers, other people that support them. And we have just been working with Amaze and with the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre to set up a new HOPE service for children and youth, which will be launched early next year. We've got 4 health services that are going to be starting that service. And we have done some work through co-design to identify the needs of different people at risk of suicide, including people who are neurodivergent.
Great, thanks, Eileesh. Stacey, you're next.
Hi everyone, my name's Stacey Rabba. I am a senior psychologist at Monash Health, and I'm also an adult autism coordinator there. I'm part of a new initiative which has just been launched this year through Mindful, through the MAC project. Sandra will explain a little bit further her role in this as well. But I lead the project at Monash Health, basically looking at supporting autistic adults through diagnosis, but also providing support to all our staff and improving our workforce capacity and understanding around autism in mental health.
Great. Good to see you again, Stacey. Sandra.
Hi everyone, I'm Sandra Radovini. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist and the director of Mindful. Mindful is a teaching and training unit part of Melbourne University, and our role is to skill up a broad mental health workforce. We have been providing training and support in the child and adolescent mental health services around autism for about over 10 years now, and as Stacey mentioned, in this last 12 months there is a project with 6 adult services to indeed increase the awareness, increase the knowledge, increase the skills of adult mental health clinicians to understand autism and the overlap with comorbid mental health problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. And Robin.
Good afternoon. I'm Robin Young. I'm a professor in psychology at Flinders in South Australia. And my main role there as an academic is, well, I've been investigating autism for about 30 years now, but as I've got older, so have many of my clients. So I've gone from the early detection and diagnosis area to doing a lot of forensic work. So I do a lot of representing people with autism who have found themselves interacting with the criminal judicial system and trying to educate people in the legal fraternity and from police officers, anyone in the criminal judicial system, about autism and its presentation. But I also work as a clinical psychologist in private practice and have a number of clients who I've had to help and manage when they've had suicidal thoughts and ideations. So I'm here to learn as much as give, I hope, and hopefully we'll have a productive session.
Thanks, Robin. Good to see you. So I thought it would be useful to give a little bit of background to why this panel has been convened and what we're hoping to get out of it. So the conference we've heard a lot about sort of the research that underpins suicide prevention and mental health among autistic people. And we thought it would be really useful to have a discussion that led into and supported system change, which is something that Amaze is deeply interested in, and part of my role there. It's been an interesting 20 months here in Australia, well, worldwide, and particularly Victoria. You know, the pandemic and its lockdowns have had a profound effect on people's mental health and their social health and well-being. It's a once in a generation, hopefully, impact on the sorts of structures that are usually quite protective of people's mental health. You know, school, work, recreation, socialising. And I think we're just starting to grapple with what those impacts are only now. But with challenge also comes opportunities. So the conference led off with Steve Demopoulos, who is the Parliamentary Secretary for Mental Health. And he talked at length about the Royal Commission that we've had here in Victoria and the landmark opportunities that it's bringing to the state here. At a national level, the Productivity Commission has published its reform suggestions, and the Federal Parliament has had a select committee on mental health and suicide prevention, which has published its findings, which included a number of recommendations that were calling for, I guess, enhanced access to specialist mental health supports for autistic people. So if we think about system change, 2022 will be a big year. We have a Victorian election in November and a federal election. We don't have a date yet, but March or May is looking likely. At a policy level, we'll have a new national mental health and suicide prevention plan. And we think there's this really good opportunity to ensure autistic people as a population are included. These are all pretty unique in the short and middle term, and we're quite keen for this conference to feed into system change and reform opportunities. So we've brought together this panel, and we're hoping we are having an interesting discussion with everybody and casting our minds both now, looking at what the current status is in the mental health sector, but also looking into the future and thinking about what we might be presenting to various governments and what suggestions we might be making to them to effect change to improve mental health service provision for autistic people. In terms of how we'll run this session, we are aware that this is one of the final sessions of the day and that for a lot of people, it's been a long day in front of a screen. So to keep it engaging, we're inviting the audience members to post your questions live, and we'll bring those into the conversation as we go. And there's also a chance at the end, as with the other presentations, to engage there. So if you're listening and you have input or questions as we speak, please put them into Slido. Both Corinne and I are on hand, and we can help manage those. And Corinne did give a good intro into Amaze, but for those outside of Victoria, and a special shout out to our friends and colleagues in Europe and North America. It's a late night, and I hope the coffee is strong. Amaze is a community organisation. We were established 50 years ago, and we work to build an understanding of autism in the broader community and to support autistic people and their families. So, okay, I think we'd start with setting a bit of the scene at the moment. So, Mel, if we go to you to begin with, in your experience working with autistic people at different journeys, and maybe also with your family, would you say the mental health system is doing a good job of supporting autistic people who are experiencing mental ill health?
No, quite simply no. You want the truth? But I will say that from, my son's now 18, he was diagnosed at 5, so I've been walking this journey for a long time. There are improvements and there is greater awareness and there's more conversations happening, even the fact we're doing this conference today. But it needs to not happen a long time. Research takes a long time to see action, and we actually need action now.
Yeah. Stacey, you've your career has been at Amaze as well as in service provision in a hospital setting. From that perspective, what would you say to that question?
And look, I think I would echo Mel's sentiments, really, that it is a journey, definitely, but also that the journey of autism, particularly from what I've seen in Victoria, from Amaze and a not-for-profit through now to the public mental health sector, it's shifted. Our understanding has definitely shifted. Awareness has shifted, which is wonderful to see. There's more knowledge in the community, so I think that is a great improvement. However, specifically in mental health, I think we have some way to go, particularly in the adult space. In the youth and the child space, perhaps we do a better job and we've got more workforce capacity there and knowledge. But I think in the adult space, we are just at the tip of the iceberg. So it's just the beginning, but also I think an exciting phase of the journey that we can really lots of effort into now to make things improve.
Sandra, do you have any reflections on the mental health system and how it supports autistic people?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I've had now a very long career in mental health, and when I started, I would say that there was close to zero knowledge. And this is if I think about the last 20 years. I think there have been quite a few inroads, and so there are the mental health system is a very big system. It's a private system, a public system, a child and adolescent, an adult system. So there are places where things have changed dramatically from my viewpoint, and there are other places where there is a way, we've got a long way to go. Where it has changed, and again, I have a Victorian view because that's where I work. In the child and adolescent mental health services, a lot has changed in the last 15 years of the awareness, of the capacity to do a set time, well, sometimes not timely, do more assessments, be able to actually help young people and children and understand that intersect between mental health and ASD. but we still need to do more. We still need to do better. There are still long waiting lists, which are very, very difficult. And that is a question of resourcing. Mindful, my centre, has been steadily training people over the last 10 years. And even if I just take last year, we had 1,200 participants in our training. And as Stacey said, this year, this new project of training adult mental health clinicians, it's the first time this is being done in Victoria. It is in some ways shameful to be saying that this is the first time adult mental health clinicians have access to training. And there has been great enthusiasm and uptake. And again, from the adult mental health clinicians, there will have been 1,000 participants in our training in this project. This is just the start. Stacey called it the tip of the iceberg. I agree. We've got way more work to do, but what we are seeing is that enthusiasm from clinicians to want to learn, to want to better understand that overlap, so indeed that they can do a better job for autistic clients that come to services.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks.
And we'll come to some of the focus on workforce training and how we might support clinicians and people in the mental health workforce who want to expand their practice and their depth of understanding working with autistic people. Robin, you're joining us from Adelaide. Do you have any reflections over your research and service provision career about how the mental health system supports autistic people?
Oh, I feel a bit encouraged that Melbourne might be a bit further ahead than we are in South Australia, but I've actually got 3 points to make based on what's already been said. The first one, I think Mel brought up about the translation of research into practice. It is a slow process and it takes us a bit of time to get that across, which is unfortunate, and we need to speed that up a bit. The second one, and I don't know if this is an issue in other states, is the criteria. So I have a number of ASD clients who desperately need services in mental health facilities and are unable to access them because ASD doesn't appear to be something that is recognised, if they had schizoaffective disorder or some other criteria. So we have to sort of manage the diagnosis to get them into services somehow, because people don't see ASD as something that is in need of mental health services, and that is quite a problem. There's a lot of criteria among many of the agencies that we work with. If they have drug and alcohol abuse, we can get them in somewhere. So I've just got trying to get a client in somewhere in 2 places, and they've come back and saying this person doesn't meet the criteria. And the third point I want to pick up on is when they actually do present in hospitals, when I have run ambulances for people or got them into services, when they get there, and someone brought this up in an earlier session today about camouflaging, they present quite well, and then I've had to seriously been on the phone and advocate and say, yes, they're going to present well, they're an autistic person, they are camouflaging the condition, but I have serious concerns about this person to be able to get them to get the help. Otherwise, a number of times within an hour or 2, they've simply been released, despite the fact that I think they're suicidal at the time. So they're the 3 points that I have to contribute.
Thanks, Robin. And Eileesh, you have a privileged perspective, I would say, from within the Department of Health, looking at a system. Do you have any reflections that you'd like to share on how a system more broadly understands autism and neurodivergence?
Yes, I think the system has a lot to learn, but I also think that we're at a really good place at the moment with a new mental health reform just commencing with the final report of the Royal Commission. And you heard Steve Demopoulos this morning list the different things that are going to be, the different initiatives that are going to be brought into the system as we go forward. It is over 10 years, so that, it will take some time. But I think, and I can speak from the experience of leading on the Child and Youth Hope service and the work that we did in co-design. So each of the services spoke with children and young people and parent families and carers about their experiences and what they would like to see in that service. And we also had a stakeholder session as well. And through that, we heard about the challenges that people face when they attend a health service and what they would need to be able to feel safe and to get the best service that they can, thinking about all of the things we've heard today about masking and the right way to speak to a person and to draw out how they're feeling and to listen and pick up on those cues, the different cues. I think our teams I think we're at a start of a journey though, and I do hear the concern raised about the adult services in particular. So we're starting with 4 new child and youth hope services, and we've got so much information out of that co-design process that we followed that I think we will absolutely be now taking to our adult suicide prevention services, and also looking at training as well for the teams that work in those services. The sort of training that people need to work with someone who's neurodivergent, I think would be so useful for anyone who accesses the service as well. So for someone who's in distress, I think being slow and listening and taking time and seeing the perspective of that person, many other things that have been raised today, would be useful for anyone accessing the service. So I think I'd just like to make another point, and we'll probably talk about it some more, but this is the start of a journey of reform. The expectation from the Royal Commission is to design services with people with lived experience. And I think, as Lisa Morgan said today, no one knows better what they need than people with autism or who are neurodivergent. So we need to make sure that those people are included in design going forward. And it's certainly something I want to see as we start to build on the reform, that what we're learning through this piece of work that we've done with Child and Youth Hope, we can take into other parts of the system and really reinforce how important. I would also like to say that the 4 Child and Youth Hope services that have just been through this process have been so amazed and have really loved going through that process and are looking at how that they can bring that into other parts of the reform in their health services as well. So I guess going back to the original point to the question is, I think the system needs a lot more work, but I also have hope that we are at the start of a really positive journey to make some really important system changes.
Thanks, Eileesh. And you offer a great segue with your introduction of co-design and co-production, which was highlighted by many of the people on the lived experience panel. And I'd like to turn to that in a second. But in the spirit of live audience participation, a question has come through from one of our colleagues in Canberra, Bob Buckley, and Bob has a wealth of experience in autism and related policy. And he offers this question. At the first World Autism Congress back in 2002, which was in Melbourne, the Congress heard that a person with, quote, treatment-resistant mental illness, unquote, may be autistic. And Bob asks, how much progress have we made since then? So perhaps Sandra and Robin, given you have a wealth of experience in both research and service provision, treatment-resistant mental illness may be autistic. What would your reflections be on progress from the early 2000s to now?
I'm happy to jump in, Chris. One of the things that remains, I think, challenging is when autism is undiagnosed, when indeed mental health clinicians are seeing what they, a mental health problem, anxiety, depression, psychosis. And some of the times we have this sense of, okay, it's not going well, something is not right, the terminology treatment resistance. And what ought to happen is that people review, okay, well, if it's not working, then am I missing something? And increasingly, indeed, we are highlighting to our workforce, to the child and adolescent mental health workforce, now to the adult workforce, you have to think about autism. You have to think about autism, that it may be something you don't know about yet. And it may be part of the reasons where you're sitting there as a professional going, something's not right. You know, it's as though you're missing a piece of the puzzle. So there is, in the child and adolescent space, that is certainly the case. And to come back to a comment of Robin's, what has changed in our CAM services is that now up to 40 or 50% of the referrals to our state services are young people with autism, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. That is a big shift in the 20 years from, or even maybe not even 20 years, from the 2009 Victorian Autism State Plan in those 12 years. But I agree, when something is not working, then the idea of think about autism is critical.
Thanks, Sandra. Robin?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I guess I want to also be mindful that I'm not coming across as ableist, because treatment resistant, obviously there's people with autism that don't want treatment, and treatment is not something that they're looking for, and that's absolutely fine. And what I think I'm interested in very much is people with co-occurring diagnoses that they're resistant to to the treatment that's being offered because it is not specific to autism. And by that, I mean a number of other co-occurring conditions that may need to be treated specifically. I've just written a paper on the overlap between ASD and eating disorders. So we see a number of young women that have been treated for many, many years for an eating disorder. But, people have sort of thought, it's not quite right. They're treatment resistant to that. And then you realise, why is that the case? Oh, because the underlying condition is not, anorexia. It actually is autism that's underpinning that. And that could be the same for other disorders, including trauma and depression, anxiety, so forth. And often they've been misdiagnosed. So I think it's making sure that we recognise, as Sandra was saying, that if they're not responding to that treatment, the treatment isn't the treatment for autism. And that's something we need to think about.
Yeah, it sounds like at the foundation, it's an effective assessment and diagnosis for people who are exploring that line for themselves. Mel, you were nodding furiously there. Was there anything you wanted to add to the idea of appropriate supports and treatments? I think you're on mute still.
Sorry. There's a couple of things I wanted to add, and I always like to have a chat, but we're still not getting it right because the rates are still too high. And I think the other bit is we've also become very focused on the autistic individual, but unfortunately they have a family that needs to be brought along with them. And many times that's actually being missed and not considered. And I see so many families that have been to Kim's and they've been turned away because there's a lack of understanding about autism and mental health, but they've been turned away with nowhere else to go. So we're dealing with people in crisis that, their version of crisis, and they've got nowhere else to go and no help. So on one hand, Bob, I was really pleased to see your question because there is a lot of work still to be done. And I think that the more we talk about it and the more that we raise the awareness, and it's great that, we've got people like Sandra, Robin and Stacey in the, research part of it all that have that's in their mindset. But at the same time, I'm quite passionate about, where to now? We need to actually be given some more help and understanding and recognition of the differences between a neurotypical person and an autistic person and their reactions and same.
Great. Thanks, Mel. So, Sandra.
Can I jump in,
Of
Mel?
course.
Mel, I'm not a researcher, so that is not what I do. I hope that I take the research that others do and teach the workforce. So that translational piece is the piece that I do. And there, we have come some distance, but I acknowledge that we have got a long way to go. And some of it is training related to understand autism, to understand the overlap with autism and mental health problem. And some of it is capacity, that we have not enough capacity either to meet the needs of the community. So both those things are happening at the moment.
Thanks, Sandra. So we're going to jump on that segue that Eileesh offered us earlier. And for those outside of Victoria, co-design is the word du jour at the moment, and that's fantastic. It's we're still bedding down what that means and how to put that into practice. But our understanding is seeing the people who use a system as the experts and the partners in both its design and its implementation. So throwing this out to the panel, and I'll go to Stacey first. How can mental health services introduce co-design and co-production principles when either designing or delivering supports to autistic people?
I think they can embed them within their service right from the get-go, right from the very beginning. So if you're creating a new service like we have at Monash just in this year, right from the beginning, we established a steering committee, we established expertise, knowledge, and at the forefront, at the core really, was our lived experience. So we had, autistic individuals with lived experience of mental illness, carers, family members, part of that at the core, what needs to happen, what's missing, but also how do we actually create a service that is addressing the need and hopefully overcoming some of the barriers. So I think it's right at the beginning. We don't kind of do it halfway, afterwards, afterthought. It's at the very start. I do feel strongly about co-design. It is something that is becoming more and more well versed in the system, but I think again, like many other areas, we've got a long way to go, but also in terms of the actual workforce. So, the peer workforce, peer workers, lived experience workers within the actual mental health workforce, consumer consultants, they've got an array of different names really. But in terms of having that experience, it's something that a mental health clinician who doesn't have that background can really learn from. And we've already seen in our service, there's been incredible amount of knowledge that's been shared and really valued too. So, yeah.
That was one of the points that came through on the lived experience panel, in that in many cases, the autistic person has to lead the clinician and train them in understanding what it's like to be autistic. And when you're experiencing crisis, it's a very difficult burden to be putting onto somebody. So it's great to hear that this is something that's been baked into the model at Monash Health from the outset. It's very promising, and hopefully something that can be expanded a lot more broadly through the health and mental health systems. Eileesh, I'd be keen to hear your views on what co-production and co-design means from a Department of Health perspective, and maybe you can talk a little bit about in practice how that's been used in the CY Hope program that you've been establishing.
Thanks. Yes, I think co-design and co-production, as Chris said, is language that we're using more frequently and is being very much the flavour of the month, and hopefully for many years. But I think we have to also remember what that really means in practice too. So co-production is really that handing full power over to and making sure there's absolute shared power in decision making, in the service design, implementation, as you said, Stacey, right at the beginning, starting from scratch, and co-design is an extension of that as well. I think we need to be careful when we use that language too. I think I would say we have designed our Child and Youth Hope service with children, young people, parents, families and carers, but we didn't start from scratch. So that's something we do need to be we were very clear about that. So the Royal Commission really did set the conditions for how we were going to implement this model of care for Child and Youth Hope, and it was informed by the existing Adult Hope program and to be adapted locally for different services. So I just wanted to just say that at the beginning. And so that's something that in the department we're always trying to balance that tension between what is completely wholly co-production and co-design and what is maybe doing parts of the journey along the way. And I think that's probably a little bit what we did with Child and Youth Hope. Going back to what we did do though, as I said, we had our adult Child Hope program. So that was a program that had been running for a number of years at initially 12 area mental health services, and it had largely a focus on adults. So some services might have seen people as young as 16, but in most cases it was 18 and over. So the Royal Commission saw that opportunity to look at building something for the younger cohort. And so in the Royal Commission's recommendations, they said expand the program across Victoria and start a phase 1 program with 4 health services. So that's at Alfred Health, Monash Health, Royal Children's and Origin. Start a phase 1 Child and Youth Hope service and those 4 services to work in partnership. So the first step we did was design a service framework for Hope, and we ran some workshops with young people. We didn't have children in these workshops, but young people, carers, families, and we tried to bring in as many different groups at greater risk into those discussions to work out what would the service framework look like and how would you like the service to be designed. So how should that happen? So that was our first step, and we did that last year. And we also we created a reference group of many different stakeholders who work with different groups at risk of suicide, including Amaze and Chris Templin and Darren from Henley from the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Service. And then what we did was we engaged a coach for the 4 health services. So one of the things we learned through that first stage was that the health services all had different experience and confidence in doing this co-design work. And so we engaged a human-centered design coach to work with each of the 4 health services and across the 4 health services to help them go through all the stages of design. So right from the beginning of thinking about how they were going to run the sessions, going through the recruitment process with them, running the sessions, making sure they were safe, and then going to what we called prototyping. So once they'd had their workshops with different groups, then they would then go away and develop a model of care based on that, or a prototype, and then take that back to the group for feedback. And we also ran alongside that some consultation sessions with different stakeholder groups, including people with lived experience in those groups too. And we ran one with Amaze and Olga Tennyson Research Autism Research Centre as well, to develop some design guides. So these design guides would sit alongside the design process for the health services and help them to also add more into the service for the different groups at greater risk. So we ran that over quite a long time, and then we took the feedback, as we said, back to those different groups, and then the services went away and updated their models. I think, stop for a second, I've been just speaking a lot. And I think the other thing that's really important about this is that this is not a set and forget process. So we're now at still prototyping is continuing. The services are set to set up their programs early next year, and we'll be then running an evaluation, which we also want to bring in people with lived experience into that process as well. And we want that evaluation to be a learning process and an opportunity to adapt and change and learn through the process, and begin to also think about what else we need to do. I don't know, that's just an overview of that.
No, that's fantastic. And I hope the lessons that you you and us as a broader sector can draw from that engagement process can be summarised and shared and really rolled out everywhere. I think a lesson is that if we hard bake it from the outset, then the foundation is a lot more robust. So I'd like to turn our minds to some of the priorities for change. Again, thinking about how we can address systemic issues. Sandra, you mentioned earlier that 50% of the referrals to some of the services come from autistic people. That tells me that there's an overwhelming need for mental health support. Indeed, Amaze and our colleagues at the Australian Autism Alliance, we conducted a national survey of autistic people and their families and carers last year. We reached over 3,800 people and got some fairly unfiltered responses about people's experiences across different areas, and mental health was one of them. 75% of the autistic respondents have a diagnosed mental health disorder condition, my apologies, and a further 8% had an undiagnosed condition. So the need is real. It tells me, and I'm going to pinch your line, Sandra, that autism really must be core business for mental health. Now, thinking about workforce and workforce training, it sounds like you're oversubscribed. What can we do to improve at all levels the understanding of clinicians, nursing staff, support staff who are working in mental health services, considering from education all the way up to CPD and training opportunities like Mindful offer?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It is clear that one of the keys to good outcomes for autistic people is access to mental health care across the lifespan. And that access, there should be options, whether it is private practitioners, whether it be counsellors in schools, whether it is people who work in hospitals, who work in the state mental health services. All of those people should understand autism well, should understand the overlap with mental health problems, should understand how do you adjust your interventions to enable the autistic person to make the most of what it is that the way that you're trying to help. From my perspective, you go through a phase of, well, first of all, you do the awareness. We've done awareness. I think people get that. It is a need. It has to be core business part of mental health. I think the next bit is you have to train a workforce, and we are playing catch up. Now, we have thought of in the past as autism was this rare thing, so only a few people needed to know something about autism. That was where I started in my career. Two, completely the other side of, no, actually, this is high prevalence. This has to be part of everyday work for every single mental health clinicians. And so there is this lag in training, even though, as I've said, we've been doing it for 10 years. So you train at every opportunity. You build it into people's professional discipline training. You make it an important thing. I don't think I heard the word autism when I was training as a psychiatrist. And I know it's a while ago, but that just to give you that perspective. Then you make it part of professional development, because there are both the new people coming through training, but then you've got a whole workforce that are past their basic training and are there, and they need support. It needs to be a sustained endeavour. A workforce changes, a workforce moves, new research comes into the field that needs to be disseminated. This has to be sustained. And it really has not been. It has been piecemeal, it has been tiny amounts of money, and there just has to be more across the board in every direction.
Is it a question of resourcing?
Yes, it is a question of resourcing. Our centre is the only centre that is doing this in this way of teaching an entire workforce. And we have a tiny resource, even though it has been recently increased, but for the longest time we had the tiniest resource to do this. And the response is overwhelming. As I said, this year it will be something like 2,400 participants. Every single training is oversubscribed. There is, we just, and this is, we are trying to, because we are Victorian, we are trying to say, well, we give first priority to this project to Victorians, and then we open it up. We get people from all around Australia. We get people from New Zealand. We occasionally get people from all kinds of far-flung places who are saying, well, this is very clinical teaching, and it's hard to get this kind of teaching, that overlap, not just learn about autism, but learn about autism, mental health, and how these things overlap, which is what we're keen to do. So resourcing is key to this, sustained, ongoing, enough of it, etc.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm going to throw to one of the questions from the audience, and this questioner has remained anonymous, but it's a great question, and it's the most voted on the Slido at the moment. And the question is, nobody has talked about family and parents of the person with autism. Can you please discuss how they can best support the person and who can support the carers? Mel, this is right down your alley. You can talk about this.
Yeah, this is right down my alley. Because I'm wearing, as I said, I'm wearing an autistic hat and a parent hat, and I didn't know I was autistic first and foremost, so I was wearing the parent hat. And to find support and resources out there is really hard. And what I've learned, the greatest sense of strength is actually to connect in with your community. So find other parents or people in similar journeys to you, because often it can be really lonely and you don't realise. And that was part of the reason why I started Different Journeys with Merrin, because we wanted to connect in with others. And I think the other bit is one of the big challenges that we have, and even today we're talking about a narrow field of autism and mental health, but, we're looking at NDIS, we're looking at Centrelink, we're looking at education. We're dealing with so many hats as a parent or a carer, trying to navigate often for what we see of basic human rights for our children. And, and in the end, we're trying to do prevention, but actually often we're reacting because we're reacting to everybody else's reactions too. And even still, I have to take therapists to my school appointments to be heard. So it is hard and it is something, but connecting in with your peer support is something that's changing. And also the government are recognising carers more, and they're investing a lot more money in carers, and they're recognising. And, we say the adage of trauma informed, and I hope that in the future, everything that, these ladies are saying, my grandchildren who will probably be autistic, they won't necessarily have that trauma informed lens because we're doing it right and better.
Great points. And,
I could keep going, but I'm trying to reduce myself, Chris.
You're doing a great job. And, you make really important points about caring for the carer as well. An incredible amount of work is done by family and family members to support people who are going through crisis, and I don't think it's recognised enough.
Chris, the statistics are really alarming with relationship breakdowns and, mental health of parents of autistic individuals. And it does need to be documented that, we're in it. And if we don't help the carers, we're not helping the autistic individual.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Mel. Well said. Robin, in your introduction, you mentioned an interest in other elements of the service system and thinking with a social model of health. It's a little bit narrow, I think, to look at the mental health system alone and not acknowledge the other social drivers of poor mental health at both an individual and population level. We know there's clear links between economic stress and cost of living pressures, housing, unemployment, and mental health. And you mentioned policing in the justice system. Unfortunately, it's often a default response to people in crisis, something that we hope is changing. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how us who are working day to day in the autism sector and mental health, how we might engage other parts of the public sector, and specifically policing and justice, and build their understanding of autism and how they might be able to work sensitively and with nuance with autistic people that come into their orbits.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think it all boils down to education, and I feel like I'm just chipping away. So I take every opportunity I can to present to the Legal Services Commission. So there I get a more widespread audience, but on giving public addresses where I can, going to court quite often, educating the judge, the jury on how that person might present because they're autistic. And at the coalface level, you know, an interaction just recently between a client of mine and the police, as the police were telling her to look her in the eye and listen to her, and before she was arrested, you know. So and then trying to educate the ambulance officers at the scene. You know, this sort of crisis was terrible. So, you know, there I'm educating them on an individual basis. In that situation, we've had the same police officers called several times, so they're familiar with me and that particular client. But it's, I don't know how it gets more widespread. I was thinking about what Sandra was saying in psychiatry and not having been educated. I used to give just one lecture every year to the South Australian Psychiatric Training Unit. And I remember one year, this is a long time ago, and I don't know if things have changed much, but they were looking a little bit dumbfounded when I was talking about autism. And I said to them, you know, how much experience have you had with the autistic community? And one of the psychiatric registrars said to me, oh, we haven't done our childhood rotation yet. So I was a little bit gobsmacked that there wasn't the belief that autistic children grew up to be autistic adults. So yeah, I guess all I can say is education, taking opportunities where you can to educate you know, your clients, their families, people with whom they interact, publish, get out there in the media, not just social media, but mainstream media, and authority bodies like the legal services and police force. I know New South Wales have done a lot of work in educating the police force, and but I mean, there's just so many avenues where we need education, because if we don't get it right, it affects that person for the rest of their life.
Thanks, Robin. I'm conscious that we're coming up towards 3:30, and I want to turn our gaze into the future and think about some of the advocacy and policy opportunities that are coming up, and how this panel and the conference more broadly might feed into those. So this is what would we call it, like a blue sky or greenfields question. And I'm going to throw it to Stacey. What are some of the important lessons that you know now that you've learned through your career that you wish you knew when you began with regards to working with autistic people?
I would say really listening to the autistic voice. Listening to that autistic voice early on, and working together as a community. I think that collective voice that Sandra has mentioned to us previously as well, I think that really stands above and beyond what we are capable as one individual. Not to say that your own individual voice doesn't matter, but that collective voice really does go a long way. The more of us who are in this and discussing and raising the issues, the better outcomes we are likely to have, and the better trajectory as well for the autistic community and their family members as well. So I think that's really key. I think also just on everyone's point around education and knowledge and having those conversations, one of the greatest learnings I've seen at Monash has just been the clinicians' openness and willingness to learn. And when someone is willing and open to learn, you have so much potential. And I think that's been a real wonderful sight to see just in this short period of our initiative this year. So I am hopeful, and I think holding on to that hope is also really key.
Yeah, it is good to hear. And I think, you know, you can conceptualize a health system in two ways. You have the structures and the money that supports it, but the main part of a health system is the people that are doing the work day to day. And what I'm hearing from both you, Sandra, and Stacey, is that there is a strong desire in this state, at least, for people to move beyond awareness and into some higher fidelity understandings of how to work in mental health settings with autistic people, which gives me heart. Mel, like if you could design one major change for the mental health system that's going to make it more accessible and better for autistic people who need it, what would that be?
One, I think there's three things, and I think, they've all covered that we need more training for our allied health, but we also need more training for our families too, and the opportunity potentially to share the training sessions with families and therapists together. So together we learn and we don't have all the answers. And I think, from a personal perspective, what's been the greatest success for me is building up a team around me so that I don't have everything in one, all my eggs in one basket. I've got a variety of different therapists all working individually with my children to actually prevent them. So every time there's a relapse, I've got options and support available. So for me, that's probably that multidisciplinary team. If it was in a perfect world, the multidisciplinary team wouldn't be for everybody.
Great.
That's a pie in the sky and probably people won't fund it.
I'm going to throw to one of the questions from the audience. So Teresa Dowding. Teresa asks, we find services seem to hear that the person has autism and then they refuse them access for comorbidities. Can we find a way to ensure access so services learn through experience? Is there anyone who would like to speak to that?
I'm happy to have a go. And then Mel, please to jump in as well. I can see if I'm muted. I was just going to say, just from my experience, not just at Monash Health, I work privately as well and have worked in other areas too. But from my experience, that's quite a common issue from autism and from other conditions as well, that, it's the autism problem, it's not mental health. And so the intersectionality is where we're trying to develop that knowledge here, that knowledge base. And I think it does take a shift. We know we need to change that narrative, like you mentioned earlier, like that we've mentioned in our panel here, the core business element. Autism is part of core business in mental health. It's not a silo thing that you think about over there. It's part of it. So we really need to ensure that that knowledge is embedded from within, and giving confidence to clinicians, to services, that they have the capacity to do that. They can do it, they can learn, and they can make a difference. Go on, Mel.
Thanks, Stacey.
And Stacey, I would flip it over and say, as families, or that we've actually got the confidence too, that we don't actually have to accept that. If they say that, we're sending us away, we can go and find and research and find people that will, on the flip side, because not everybody gets it and not everybody will ever. But we have the confidence as a family member to actually go and research and find the services that meet our needs.
We've probably got time for one more comment. Eileesh, did you want to chip into that?
Yes, I would. And I think a couple of things there, that I think the intersectionality is a really important point. And I think that from the Child and Youth Hope perspective as well, just when we did those sessions with the different groups, like we spoke to a number of different groups, but there are common themes across all of those groups. And there's also a really important thing that health services, well, one thing we were asking the health services to do is think, how do you meet the needs of someone who is neurodivergent? How do you meet the needs of someone who is identifies as LGBTIQ+, or trans and gender diverse, or Aboriginal, or all of these people could have multiple identities across that. And I think the common theme across that is everyone has a right to receive the care they need in the best place for them at that time. And so what I think is my vision for this new system is that there's a human rights framework that sits across, and I've heard human rights mentioned, across the work that we do. And so underneath that, you should be able to then learn, and through training, understand what that person needs who's in front of you, depending on whether they're an Aboriginal autistic person or an LGBTIQ+ autistic person, or whatever, however they're presenting at that time. And this is the challenge for mental health reform, for the reform agenda. I'm hoping that we don't go off and just move forward in a siloed way, but we think about how multiple needs are met within the system. And training is going to be a really big and crucial point, but these conversations and hearing from people with lived experience is so vital to ensure that the government and our system reform is held to account through this process as well. So I would welcome lots of advocacy from from all of you.
Thanks, Eileesh. I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll wrap it up now. And I would really like to highlight one of the lines that Stacey offered there, and that's the importance of collective voice. I think as a community, when we bring our voices together and we speak with cohesion and with purpose, we cannot be ignored. And we, at the moment, have an opportunity to be presenting a vision for what mental health services should be like for autistic people. And we're quite keen to move that forward. So tomorrow morning, Asfar and Amaze, we're convening a roundtable conversation with some of the presenters and some of the academics involved in mental health and autism. And the purpose of that is to distill a lot of the conversations that we've been having today and to bring out the priorities for change and to build them into a platform that anybody can share with government, members of parliament, political parties, and engage themselves in that change process. So on that note, I will say thank you very much to all of my co-presenters and panel members. It's been great talking to you, and I'll throw back to Corinne.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, for leading that informative discussion, and for all of the panel members for sharing your thoughts and experience. And it is exciting to hear that, yeah, we are collecting all of this, including the unanswered questions. Thank you for those questions. And we are bringing it together tomorrow, which is awesome. And it is great to hear there are things happening. You know, police are being trained, clinicians are signing up for training. I know police officers are hearing about autism more often. So there is a shift happening, and more is coming. And hopefully Joe can take some of this into schools. And, you know, for parents, I think there's still a bit of a lack, but check out, as I said, Amaze. I hope it's okay, I mentioned another one, the ICANN network has awesome resources as well. The Suicide Response Project that was launched today has information for parents and family on how to respond to someone autistic in crisis, you know, what to say, what not to say. So hopefully there's some helpful tips. Well, that concludes our panel discussion. We now have a 30-minute break coming up. So it's the afternoon slump time, so go refresh. And just a reminder again to go vote for your favourite poster. And I'll see you back here at 4 o'clock. Thanks everyone, see you soon.